In this video I'm going to show you, basically walk you through how to plan a flight from literally having a map to having a flight plan at the end. So what we're going to do in this video is go from Denham, which is down here in the Heathrow CMA. Can sort of ignore that, that just really has its own entrance and exit zones, which you can sort of ignore for the purpose of this. But from Denham to Weston, which is up over here. And when you circle the place, it doesn't have to be, when you circle them, it doesn't have to be like specifically around the place, as long as you show that this is where you're going to be, and don't circle over any important information. And we're going to have one waypoint along the way, which is called Wing, which I've circled over there. And first thing you want to do is, well, after circling them, is draw a line, and you want to make sure that the line goes from the center of each location, so where you're actually going to be flying to. So this is going to be your track. The track is the actual path that you'll fly along the ground, as opposed to heading, which is what you'll fly in the air, which will take wind into account. So after you've done that, you can then fill in your flight plan. I'll put a link to this in below, in the below section, where you can download it and fill it in yourself for whatever you're doing. So we're going from Denham to Weston, so we're going from Denham to Wing, and then from Wing to Weston. Now the safety altitude is calculated as the highest obstacle within generally 5 nautical miles either side of your track. So what you should do here is get your map the right way up and use a ruler and make sure that you're using the 1 to 500,000 scale as opposed to the 1 to 250,000 scale, because that will be a fairly massive error otherwise, especially when you're coming to work out your distances. So yeah, want to use the 1 to 500,000 scale. So you put that along part of the route that you want to work out your safety altitude for. Have 5 nautical miles either side, and just basically go from the start location to the waypoint and just scan along 5 nautical miles either side of the route to find the highest location. So there I found one. That's probably going to be my highest point. That's it there. So after I found my highest point, I just take my highest point, which in this case was 876 feet. I had 1,000 on there to give me my minimum safe altitude of roughly 1,900 feet. So I'll fill that in with 1,900. Your planned altitude can be pretty much whatever you want. It depends on fuel efficiency, how high you want to be generally, and if you're flying above the transition altitude, you want to make sure that you're flying in accordance to the quadrantal rule, which I talk about in my QNH QFE video, altimetry video. So I do the same with the second part of the second leg, and the highest point there is Silverstone race circuit, or not even. I think that was 1,600. It was. And then you don't particularly want to fluctuate your planned altitude that much, because if you're constantly climbing and descending, it's going to affect your fuel efficiency, and it's going to become generally more difficult to fly and hard to plan for. So after you've done your altitudes, you then want to work out what track it is, and what I've got here is a compass, and you want to make sure, as I'm doing here, is lined up the north pointer with one of the northern grid lines on the map. And then you put the center of the compass over your origin and just follow the line out from the compass. So in this case it was 335, I believe. Yep. And do that with the second waypoint as well, second leg. And because the line doesn't go off the edge of the compass here, I have to use a ruler to extrapolate the line. Sensible thing to do, otherwise you're just guessing, which any inaccuracy isn't going to help. One thing I've noticed, that actually when you plan a route, although it seems quite sort of like pedantic to just plan to the nearest degree, even though it seems quite impossible to actually fly that, when you're actually in the air, it seems to really make quite a bit of difference, even just a couple of degrees out, which you can imagine. But even fluctuating around the exact correct heading will help. So beforehand, before you started planning, you would have looked up your weather forecasts and NOTAMs and everything. And at 2,000 feet, I'm just saying here that the wind is going to be 220 degrees at 15 knots. So now that I've got my track, I can begin to actually fill in what heading I'm going to be actually flying in the air. So I'm going to fill it in here that the wind is 220 at 15 knots and the outside temperature at that altitude is 10 degrees. So the TAS is the true airspeed, and that's calculated because as you go higher in the atmosphere, the temperature changes and therefore the dynamic pressure on the pitot tube will change, so your indicated airspeed will be different from the true airspeed. So we're working out here is the true airspeed. So I put in 10 degrees and 2,000 feet, and I followed my indicated airspeed, which would be 85 knots because that's my cruising speed, and it told me that if I'm indicated 85, my true airspeed will be 87. So I wrote that down. And now I'm putting down the fact that it's 220 at 15, so I put the top of the thing at 220 and 15 knots downwards. I'm going to put how to use the computer in a separate video because there's quite a lot of things you can do with it, and it's not the easiest thing to wrap your head around. Despite, yeah, I'm just going to continue to show what I'm doing. So I'm assuming you've seen the other video, or you know how to use this. So to work out your maximum drift, you basically just put it as a right angle to whatever wind you have. So that was 10 degrees for me. And so that means that no matter which direction I'm flying in, the maximum drift will never be more than 10 degrees. And that also means that if I had to divert in the air and I had to sort of estimate how much effect the wind is going to have on me, if I'm flying 45 degrees to the wind, I could say it's roughly going to be 5 degrees. I'm going to have to correct 5 degrees roughly, or something like that. So what I'm working out now is my the heading that I'm going to fly in the air. So I put in my true airspeed and the wind direction with the arrow, and I'm using the compass in the way I would have explained in the other video to determine my heading that I'm actually going to fly in the air. If you were to have a diversion in the air, you could potentially work it out with the compass, but that's when you would use your maximum drift number, because you don't particularly want to whip out the compass whilst you're still flying the aircraft and possibly lost. And what I'm putting in now is the variation, and you can see along the map here there's a line going all the way up here, and here it says 1.5 degrees west. And because I'm slightly to the left of it, I'm going to round it up to 2 degrees. Variation is around the Earth's magnetic field. There's slight variations. It's not all symmetrical. There's a difference between the magnetic north and true north. So that's corrected for. So this will be corrected for the compass now. So I can now say that magnetic 345 will take me to true 343. And my ground speed is also determined from the computer. So after you got your ground speed and your heading, you just have to work out the distance, which is probably the most simple thing here. Make sure again that you're using the 1 to 500,000 scale, and just place the 0 over your destination or origin, and you basically want to have the exact location that you're going over either end of the ruler. You don't want the measure to the outside of the circle, because that's not where you're going to be turning. You're going to be turning directly over whatever you plan to. So I got, let's see what I got. I got 21 and 15. So after you've worked out your ground speed and your leg times, after you've worked out your ground speed and your distance, you can then work out your leg time, which is again pretty simple. You can use the computer for this, but I prefer not to. I prefer getting a very accurate reading from a calculator, and it's just simple distance over time. So you would do 21 divided by 96 times 60, which will give you 13.125, which is 13 minutes. And you have 15 divided by 88 times 60, which will give you 10.2 or 10 minutes. And after you've got that, so that's a total time of 23 minutes. It's only a short journey. You want to fill in your stations that you're going to be talking to. So you're going to be talking, of course, to the place that you're leaving, normally at least anyway. So that's Denham, which is 130.725 for me, decimal 75. And I'm going to be talking to Farnborough North, which you can get from a different map, which will tell you the areas that that will cover. So that's 132.8. And my destination at Weston, says on the map, is 122.12175. And the last final thing to do is to work out your fuel requirements. So my Cessna 152 has a fuel consumption of 6 US gallons per hour. I need 10 minutes for taxi and takeoff, so that's 1. The route fuel is 20 minutes, so that's 2 gallons. And the reserve fuel another hour is 6, so the total fuel required is 9 US gallons, which is a pretty low amount. And once you've sorted everything else like that, you normally, if most airfields in the UK at least will have PPR, which means prior permission required. So you have to sort of book in. You have to phone up the tower and say that you're about coming, what time, what aircraft, if you plan to fuel up there, or if you want to rest or have a parking space. You also should phone up to get the airfield information, which will tell you what runways in use, and also you can ask for the weather. After you've done that, if you haven't already, check the NOTAMs to make sure that everything is okay. There's not going to be any sort of temporary Class A routes along your way, which will be pretty drastic, or some areas you need to avoid, which actually happens quite often. And you might want to just double check the weather again before you go, because by the time you've finished planning, especially if it's a long flight, it might have updated and changed.